The red carpet was still wet from the afternoon rain when Marcus Holloway got shoved off it. Not asked to step aside, not redirected, shoved. One hand flat against his chest, the other gesturing toward the crowd barrier like he was livestock that had wandered through the wrong gate. The bouncer said something into his earpiece before he even turned to look at Marcus, which told you everything about the order of operations in that man's mind. The decision had already been made. The look came after. Marcus was wearing a black canvas jacket over a plain white shirt. His shoes were clean, but they were not expensive. He had a laminate badge clipped to his chest, but it was turned backward, the way you let it swing when your hands are full of other things. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folded paper bag from the catering tent. He looked like a man running an errand. And that, apparently, was enough. He stumbled off the carpet edge. One foot caught the rope barrier. The coffee sloshed, the bag swung, and the small group of photographers 10 feet away tracked the motion the way photographers do, reflexively, their lenses swinging toward any disturbance. 2 of them lowered their cameras when they saw him. One of them did not. The bouncer was already turning back toward the entrance, and then the doors at the top of the steps burst open. Before we get to what happened in the next 60 seconds, I need you to hold one question in your mind, because everything you are about to hear about Marcus Holloway rests on a single thing that the bouncer did not think to ask. A simple question, one that any reasonable person in that position should have known to ask before touching anyone on that carpet. The question was not asked. You will understand, by the end, exactly what it cost. Let me take you back to where Marcus Holloway began. He grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in a part of the city where the movie theaters closed before he was old enough to remember them. His mother worked for a dry cleaning business, pressing the formal wear of people she would never meet, and his grandmother, Estelle, worked the coat check at a hotel downtown for 22 years before her knees told her she was done. It was Estelle who raised him mostly. His mother worked the kind of hours that don't leave room for much else. Estelle had a ritual. Every Sunday evening, she set a folding table in the living room, and on that table she placed a different thing each week. A library book with photographs from the golden age of cinema. A stack of old film magazines with the covers still intact. Sometimes a videocassette from a box she kept under her bed, something from the 1950s or 60s that she had recorded off a late-night channel years before. She would brew tea and sit beside Marcus and describe what she was showing him, not just as entertainment, but as craft. As labour. She talked about lighting like a painter talks about pigment. She talked about the actors the way a boxing coach talks about footwork. She named things. She made him see. Estelle had wanted to work in film. She told him this once, quietly, on an evening when the light through the window was the same amber as the lamp on the folding table. The 2 of them watching a scene from a 1962 picture she had seen in a theatre at age 9. She told him she had not known it was a thing a person like her could do. She had learned that lesson late and hard, and she was teaching him early. She gave him 2 things before she died when he was 17. The first was a small notebook, navy blue, cloth-bound, its spine reinforced with a strip of black electrical tape she had pressed on herself because the original binding had begun to split. On the inside front cover she had written a single sentence in her deliberate, unhurried hand. Every room that tries to close on you is a room that already lost. The second thing was a question. She asked him what he wanted to make, not do, make, he had told her films. She closed her eyes and nodded once as though this was the right answer to a question she had been holding open for a long time. Marcus enrolled in a community college film program the fall after she died. He took the notebook everywhere. He had it in his back pocket the night he stayed late in the editing lab and taught himself the non-linear editing software the program's equipment fund couldn't properly support, watching tutorial videos on a borrowed laptop with one earbud in. The lab's fluorescent lights humming overhead long past midnight while the rest of the building went quiet around him. He had it the day his first short film screened in a borrowed lecture hall to an audience of 40 people, 14 of whom were strangers who had seen a flyer on a corkboard. He had it the morning he got a call from a production company whose name he recognized from the credits of films he had watched on Estelle's folding table, asking if he was available for a meeting. He was 22. He wore the same shoes he had worn to his grandmother's funeral. The production company operated out of a converted warehouse space on the west side of the city, 3 floors of production offices above a ground-level equipment storage room that always smelled of dust and silicone gel. Marcus started there as a production assistant, which meant he drove equipment vans and made coffee runs and stood outside in the cold, holding a reflector until his arms ached. And he did all of this with the attentiveness of someone taking notes in invisible ink. He watched how every director he worked under approached the space before the camera rolled. The ones who told you where to look, the ones who trusted the actor's instincts, and the ones who didn't. The ones who saw the light in the room, and the ones who built their own. He was good at carrying things, and he was good at watching, and he was good at being in rooms where decisions were being made without making himself conspicuous. It was the same skill set his grandmother had deployed for 22 years at the coat check: attentiveness without presumption, presence without demand. He had not understood, watching Estelle work, that she was teaching him an art form. He understood it now. That meeting led to 3 years of work on the periphery of the industry, the honest periphery, the one where you arrive earliest and leave latest and learn things by absorbing them rather than being taught. He was good at this. He had the quality that Estelle had been trying to describe to him all those Sunday evenings. He understood what he was looking at. He could read a scene the way a musician reads a piece of sheet music, hearing it before anyone else, understanding its architecture before the first note was played. The directors he worked under noticed this. Not all of them named it, but they noticed. One of them did name it. Her name was Cécile Fontaine, and she was 37 years old and had made 3 acclaimed documentary films and 1 feature that had divided critics and earned back its budget twice over. She called Marcus into her office on the 3rd day of a production he had joined as a second assistant director's runner, which was not a role that typically warranted meetings with the director, and asked him a question. "When I blocked that hallway scene this morning," she said, "I put the camera on the wrong side. I knew it within 30 seconds. I didn't correct it. I wanted to see who noticed. Did you notice?" Marcus said that he had. She asked him what he would have done. He told her. 2 minutes. She listened without interrupting, her forearms on the desk, her eyes on his face with the steady focus of someone calibrating an instrument. "Go back to work," she said. "We'll talk in 3 years." She was not being dismissive. She was being precise. 3 years later, on the day after his second short film received its first festival invitation, his phone showed a message from a number he had saved under her name. 2 words. Ready? By 26, he had made 2 short films that travelled to festivals. By 28, he had a completed feature-length script and a producer attached. By 31, he had a film in post-production with a cast that included 2 Academy Award nominees and a studio distribution deal for 8 territories. The film was called Threshold. The premiere was tonight. Marcus had spent the afternoon at the theatre doing the things that fall to a director in the final hours before a film becomes public. He walked the projection booth and confirmed the technical specifications with the projectionist, a man named Owen who had worked in this booth for 11 years and who communicated in the clipped, confident shorthand of someone who has heard every director's anxiety before and understood it to be a form of love. He stood at the back of the empty auditorium and watched the first 2 minutes of the film on the full-size screen, the sound filling the room the way it was supposed to, the way he had heard it in his head for 4 years, and he stood very still and let it land. Renata found him there. She did not say anything. She stood beside him in the empty auditorium for the length of those 2 minutes. The screen filling the dark with the film's opening image, a library door at early morning, pale light coming through a high transom window falling across the floorboards in the exact angle they had spent 11 hours on a stepladder to capture correctly. "It's right," Renata said when the clip ended. "Yes," Marcus said. That was the only film conversation they had needed. By 6:45, the theatre was staffing up. The carpet was going down outside. Marcus had changed into the clothes he had brought for the evening, the black canvas jacket over the plain white shirt, not dressed-up clothes, but not working clothes. The middle ground of a man who has spent enough time on set that the line between the two has become philosophical rather than practical. He clipped his badge to his chest and went back out to check on the rope line setup and the arrangements for the cast arrivals and about a dozen other things that were not strictly his responsibility, but that he attended to anyway because the film was his and the evening was the film's and everything in the evening's perimeter was therefore his concern. Around 7:20, Renata appeared at his elbow and told him she was about to do a brief interview with a trade outlet near the rope line and that she needed coffee when she was done because she had been running on 3 hours of sleep since the post-production final colour pass had required an unscheduled correction overnight. She asked for 2 almond croissants from the catering tent. He said he would bring them. And now I need you to understand what a film premiere means in practical terms, because the meaning is not what the photographs suggest. The red carpet outside the Devereux Theatre on this particular Thursday evening in October ran 37 feet from the street barrier to the entrance steps. It accommodated the talent, the producers, a selection of press, and the people whose operational work made the evening possible. The people in that last category often looked to an uninformed eye like they did not belong there. They were wearing working clothes. They were carrying things. They were moving through a space that had been staged for photographs they were not meant to be in. Marcus was moving through precisely that space when the bouncer's hand found his chest. He had been to the catering tent around the corner to pick up coffee for his director of photography, Renata Orsay, who was somewhere near the rope line managing an interview, and for the film's co-producer, Jerome Lund, who was standing at the top of the steps talking to the theatre's programming director. The paper bag contained 2 almond croissants that Renata had specifically requested and that Marcus had specifically promised. He stepped back onto the carpet after the shove. Not away from it, onto it. He did not raise his voice. He turned his badge around with one hand, the laminate swinging, and he looked at the bouncer. His face was still. The badge read, Director. The bouncer did not look at the badge. Sir, this area is reserved for talent and production personnel. I am production personnel, Marcus said. His voice was the same register it always was. I'm going to need you to move to the public area. 12 seconds passed. Marcus stood on the carpet, and those 12 seconds were not silence exactly, because there was music from inside the theatre and the sound of cameras, and the ambient noise of 200 people in various stages of arrival. But within those 12 seconds, nothing moved in the immediate vicinity of Marcus Holloway and the bouncer except the badge, swinging slightly on its clip, the word director going back and forth in the October air. The bouncer moved to physically redirect him again. That was when the doors at the top of the steps opened. Jonathan Prell did not walk out of those doors. He came through them at a pace that is difficult to describe without understanding that Jonathan Prell was 63 years old, had 2 replaced hips, and moved at all times with the careful deliberation of a man who had made a private agreement with his own body. He did not sprint, but he covered the distance from the entrance to the carpet at a speed that stopped conversations. He was screaming before he reached the first step. Not in distress, in fury. That's my lead. That is my lead director. What is happening right now? Jonathan Prell was one of the most decorated executive producers in American independent cinema. He had been in the industry for 38 years. He had shepherded 41 films from development to distribution, 12 of which had screened at major international festivals, 4 of which had received awards at Cannes. His voice, when raised, carried the specific authority of a person who had spent 4 decades in rooms where decisions were made and had never once been told to lower it. He reached the bottom of the steps and kept walking. The bouncer stepped back, not because he was asked to, because Jonathan Prell's trajectory left him no other option. Marcus! Prell reached him and gripped his shoulder. Then he turned and looked at the bouncer with an expression Marcus would later describe in an interview he gave 3 weeks after this night as the most precise and controlled anger he had ever seen on a human face. This man, Prell said, directed this film. This is his premiere. His premiere. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? The bouncer said. I apologize, sir. Prell did not respond to the bouncer again. He turned to Marcus and looked at the badge, still swinging. He looked at the coffee, the paper bag. He looked at Marcus's face, which was still. You okay? He asked. Marcus said, I was bringing Renata her coffee. Prell closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he took one of the coffee cups from Marcus's hand and walked with him up the steps, the 2 of them side by side, the photographers on the rope line tracking them with the attentiveness that gathers around something that has just happened and cannot be undone. 3 of those photographs ran in the following morning's coverage of the premiere. Now let me paint the full picture of that lobby. The Devereux Theatre had been built in 1941 and restored in 2009, and it possessed the specific grandeur of a building that had been saved by people who understood what they were saving. The lobby had a coffered ceiling, 22 feet high, painted in the original cream and gilt scheme. The floors were black and white marble. The lighting was warm and amber from sconces positioned between the arch panels, and that amber light fell on the crowd gathered inside with the quality of old film, which was either a coincidence or a deliberate tribute to the setting, and which Marcus noticed the moment he walked through the doors. He noticed it because noticing light was the central discipline of his working life. Renata was the first person to reach him inside the lobby. She took her coffee and the bag without looking at either, her eyes on his face. "I heard from out here," she said. "It's done," Marcus said. "Marcus, it's done. The film is in 45 minutes. She searched his face for something, found either what she was looking for or something close enough, and nodded. She opened the paper bag, looked at the 2 croissants, and handed one back to him. "Eat," she said. "You're not going to eat anything for the next 2 hours once the lights go down." He was not hungry. He took the croissant anyway because Renata's instructions, in his experience, were accurate. Jerome found them near the bar. He had seen the photographs already, which meant someone near the rope line had sent them directly from their camera. This happened now. The world moved faster than it used to. Jerome stood in front of Marcus and did not say anything for a moment, which was not Jerome's customary mode. Jerome was a talker, an optimizer, a person who processed events by narrating them. He had produced 4 films before this one and had cultivated across those 4 films a comprehensive vocabulary for crisis management. Every film had a crisis. The vocabulary existed for the crisis. But Jerome was standing in front of Marcus now without any of it, and his silence said more than narration would have. He looked at Marcus's jacket, the badge, still clipped, still swinging slightly. He looked at Marcus's hands, which were calm. He looked at Marcus's face, which was the same face Jerome had been looking at across production tables and editing suite consoles and budget spreadsheets for 4 years, and which was not the face of a man who had been broken by the past 20 minutes. "We're going to address it," Jerome said finally. "After the film," Marcus said. "Marcus, those photos are going to be everywhere by morning." "After the film," Marcus said again. "Tonight is for the film." Jerome looked at him. Marcus held the look without flinching. Jerome nodded. "This is what you need to understand about Marcus Holloway in this moment. He was not calm because the shove had not reached him. He was calm because he had decided a long time ago that the shove, in whatever form it came, was not going to be the most important thing about any evening that was supposed to be about something else. Estelle had not taught him to be impervious to injury. She had taught him that injury, taken with dignity, stored privately and converted to fuel, was one of the oldest and most reliable engines a person could carry. He had been carrying hers for 14 years. The film ran 112 minutes. It told the story of a black architect in post-war Chicago who designed a community library that was demolished 18 months after its completion by a city contract that had been drawn up before the first brick was laid, a contract that no one thought to mention. The library was rebuilt 30 years later by the architect's granddaughter who had kept his original blueprints in a kitchen drawer her entire adult life. Marcus had written the script over 4 years, beginning the first draft in a studio apartment with no desk, the laptop on a cutting board set across the arms of a second-hand chair. He had written it thinking about Estelle's neighborhood and the small library branch 3 blocks from her apartment that had been defunded and converted to a community services office in the late 90s. The building still standing, the carved stone lettering above its door still reading, "Reading Room" in relief, the letters worn smooth by decades of weather. He had stood outside that building the week after her funeral and looked at those letters for a long time. The film was not about that library. It was made from the grief of it. The audience at the Devereux knew they were watching something. You could hear it in the quality of the silence. Not the polite silence of an audience that is waiting to be impressed. The working silence of an audience that has already surrendered to the thing in front of them and is now only trying to keep up. The rustling that attends the opening minutes of any screening, the small adjustments and the whispered exchanges and the crinkling of programs, all of it stopped within the first 8 minutes. The room went still the way rooms go still when they are no longer optional. At the 53-minute mark, in a scene where the architect stands in the rubble of what used to be the library's reading room and finds, under a collapsed section of the reference shelves, a child's notebook filled with hand-copied passages from books the child had borrowed over the course of the library's brief life, a woman in the 3rd row wept audibly. She was not the only one. The woman was an editor at a literary journal. Marcus would not know this until a week later, when she wrote him a letter, 2 pages, longhand, describing exactly what the scene had done to her and why. The letter arrived in a cream-coloured envelope with her return address written in careful script in the top left corner. He kept it in the notebook alongside Estelle's sentence. Marcus sat in the back row through all of it. He watched the audience more than the film, the way he always did when his own work was on a screen. The film he knew. The audience was telling him something he could not have known alone. He watched Jerome, 3 rows from the front, who had read the script 11 times and sat through 4 rough cuts, lean forward in his seat at the architect's climactic confrontation with the city commissioner and not lean back for 14 minutes. He watched Renata, seated on the aisle, whose expression when the library and rubble scene played was the expression of a person who has seen the thing they made become the thing it was supposed to be. He watched the woman in the 3rd row reach for the hand of the person beside her and not let go. When the lights came up, the applause began before anyone had fully registered that the credits were rolling. It built. Jonathan Prell, seated in the centre section with the theatre's artistic director, stood first. The rest of the room followed in sections, the way a wave gathers. Marcus sat in the back row and watched the room stand for the thing he had made. The applause ran for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. He knew this because he counted, not out of vanity, but because duration is a unit of meaning, and he had spent 4 years trying to make something that could fill a room with that quality of sound for that length of time. 3 minutes and 17 seconds was longer than he had let himself imagine. He thought about his grandmother's folding table, the amber lamp, the 1962 film, and the single sentence she had written in the notebook he still carried in his jacket pocket, its spine holding together now with a second strip of electrical tape he had pressed on himself the year she died, because the first one had begun to peel. Every room that tries to close on you is a room that already lost. He stood. Not for the applause, though the applause was for him. He stood because Estelle had been right about this room and about every room that had tried to close on him before it, and he wanted to be upright when he understood all of it at once. In the lobby afterward, the event moved through its ordinary ceremonies with a quality that had been altered by the film and by the evening's earlier event, and by the particular way those two things sat together, the shove on the carpet and the standing ovation in the theatre, each one throwing the other into relief. People moved around Marcus with the attentiveness that gathers around someone whose stature has just been confirmed in public. They had always known, or some of them had, that the film was exceptional. They had not all known, until the photographs on their phones that evening, what it had cost to get it to this room. Jonathan Prell found him first, before the lights had fully come back up, while the credits were still rolling and the applause was still tapering. He did not say much. He stood beside Marcus in the back of the theatre and put one hand on Marcus's shoulder, and they stood that way for a moment. The credits reflected in the light, while the room around them came back to itself. Then Prell said quietly, as though he were confirming a fact he had known for some time but was only now permitted to say aloud, "This is a major work." Marcus did not respond. He did not need to. In the lobby, the cast gathered around him in the particular formation of people who have made something together and know it. The lead actor, a man named Daniel Ash, who had been nominated twice and had spent 6 months inhabiting the architect's careful, grieving interior, gripped Marcus's hand with both of his own and said nothing for a full 3 seconds. His face said what needed saying. The rest of the cast arranged themselves in the way casts do after a screening that has gone well, a loosening, a warmth, the specific relief of people who had trusted a director through uncertainty and had been brought through it to this room, this applause, this particular quality of amber light. The theatre's artistic director, a woman named Patricia Strand, who had been in her position for 16 years and had programmed the premiere of 3 films that subsequently won major awards, came to Marcus with a glass of champagne that she placed in his hand. "We should talk about the spring program," she said. It was the most understated conversation opener he had ever heard, and he recognized it for what it was. A journalist from the industry's most read trade publication found Marcus near the east wall with a glass of sparkling water and asked if she could speak with him. He had set the champagne down somewhere. He did not drink champagne at events where he needed to be fully present, which was most events. He answered 4 questions. On the 5th, she asked about what had happened on the carpet. He was quiet for a moment. The lobby's amber light fell on his face. "I think," he said, "the story tonight is the film." She nodded. She asked if she could follow up in the coming days. He said yes. She called 3 days later. The conversation went for an hour and 40 minutes. She was rigorous and unhurried, and she had clearly watched Threshold twice because the questions she asked about specific scenes were the questions of someone who had sat with the film rather than in front of it. He liked her for that. He told her things he had not planned to say, not because she caught him off guard, but because she had earned them. The interview ran 3 weeks later and was titled At the Publication's Editorial Discretion, with a line Marcus had spoken near its close when she had asked him what he wanted audiences to take from Threshold. He had said that he wanted them to understand that the door that doesn't open for you is not a door that knows what you're carrying. The piece ran long. 1,500 words. It covered the film, its origins in a library Marcus had found in his grandmother's neighbourhood after her death, the small community archive that became the seed of the fictional story, the 4 years from script to premiere. It covered the carpet in 3 paragraphs. It included the photographs. It was the most read article on that publication's website in the calendar year it ran. The bouncer was not employed at the Devereux for any subsequent events. This was a contractual matter between the theatre and the security firm, and it was handled without ceremony, the way institutional corrections tend to be when the facts are unambiguous and the record includes photographs. Jonathan Prell called Marcus the morning after the premiere at 7:45, which was how Prell operated. He had a meeting scheduled at 9 and he wanted to reach Marcus before it. His assistant had called the night before to confirm Marcus would be available, which was also how Prell operated. He scheduled sincerity. 7 territories have confirmed distribution, he said. The 8th is coming. I want to talk about what's next. Marcus was standing at his kitchen window with a cup of coffee. The October light was low and pale through the glass, the kind of light that happens early in the day before the sun commits to its angle, and it was the most interesting light of the morning, and he was studying it. Behind him on the kitchen table, where he had set it the night before when he came home and took it out of his jacket pocket, was the notebook. The electrical tape on its spine caught the low October light. "I have an idea," Marcus said. "Tell me." "It starts with a library," Marcus said. There was a pause on Prell's end that Marcus recognized as the pause of a person who has just understood something. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of a person who had spent 38 years in a business built on people's private obsessions and had learned to hear in 2 sentences the specific shape of one that was going to matter. "How long have you been carrying that?" Prell asked. "Since I was 17, Marcus said. 8 months later, in the same week that Threshold received its 6th major festival award, Marcus Holloway announced a production company. Its first project was a documentary about the history of black community libraries in the American Midwest, funded by a combination of private investment and a grant from a foundation that supported civic arts. The production company was named Estelle Pictures. The announcement included, at Marcus's insistence, a 1-paragraph description of his grandmother, her 22 years at the coat check, the folding table, the amber lamp, the films she had shown him and the questions she had asked him, and the single sentence she had written in the inside cover of a cloth-bound notebook that he had carried every day for 14 years. The paragraph ran in 3 publications and in the company's own press materials. One of the editors who ran it had been the woman in the 3rd row at the Devereux Theatre, the one who had reached for the hand of the person beside her and not let go, the one who later sent the letter in the cream-coloured envelope. She told Marcus this in a brief note she sent with the publication's coverage. She said the paragraph about Estelle had made her cry a second time, which she reported as a neutral fact rather than a sentiment. Marcus kept the note. Renata Ose was named as the company's director of photography. Jérôme Lund was named as co-producer. Cécile Fontaine, who had called Marcus into her office 11 years earlier and asked him what he would have done with the camera angle, agreed to serve as an advisory board member. She sent a 2-word message when she was asked. Still ready. The first documentary went into pre-production in the spring. The research team spent 3 months locating and interviewing the descendants of 14 black community library founders, people who had built reading rooms and lending collections and children's corners in neighborhoods where the city's official library system had declined to build, people who had done this with fundraised money and donated shelves, and the accumulated stubbornness of people who understood that a library is not a luxury, but a survival tool. 3 of those founders were still living. All 3 were women. The youngest was 81. One of the founding libraries, a lending collection that had operated out of a church basement in a city on the southern edge of the Midwest from 1953 to 1971, before being forced to close by a municipal zoning ruling that everyone involved understood to be pretextual, had recently been the subject of a historical preservation effort. The church building itself was still standing. The basement was intact. A community organisation had applied for a grant to restore the space and reopen it as a reading room. The documentary's production budget included a line item for the restoration. The notebook sat on Marcus's desk the day the announcement went out. He did not open it. He did not need to. He knew what was inside, and he knew what was in the binding. The second strip of electrical tape holding the spine together, placed exactly where the first one had been, pressed on with the same firm, unhurried deliberateness, the way Estelle had done everything she put her hands to. Here is what I want you to take with you from this story. The room that tries to close on you cannot know what you are carrying when you walk up to it. It makes its decision on what it can see. It sees your shoes, your jacket, your badge turned the wrong way because your hands are full. It does not see the folding table, the amber lamp, the 1962 film, the 14 years of carrying someone else's unfinished dream until you could finish it yourself. It does not see any of that. It only sees you approaching a door. That is its failure, not yours. The question worth carrying is not whether the room will open. It is what you will do with the discipline you built while it was closed. The people who built something in the quiet, in the borrowed editing labs and the community screenings and the libraries their grandmothers showed them, those people do not need the door to apologize. They need the door to open. And sometimes, in front of witnesses, with the cameras turning, it does. If someone in your life is carrying something the room can't see, be the person who asks what it is before you decide what it's worth. That question costs nothing. The absence of it costs everything. Think about who you might have already turned away from a door that was theirs to walk through. If this story sat with you, pass it to someone who needs to hear it. Every story like this one exists because someone refused to let a shove be the last word.